I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was extremely fortunate because both of my parents were teachers. My mother was an elementary school teacher. My father was a music teacher. I thought everybody grew up like this. We lived in a very creative environment when I grew up, but it was also a very structured environment because my parents knew how to structure as teachers. We did things together as a family all the time. I mean, the family unit was so important. My father would play baseball or softball with the kids, the neighborhood kids out in the street after dinner. Or if it was wintertime and it wasn't light outside, we'd sit around the table and we'd play board games, or we would play cards. My father had classical music playing in our home all the time. I think that was kind of his escape, and I hated it because I didn't understand it at all. But it was there. It was part of my background. And another part of my background, which ties into music, is that I've done a lot of singing off and on as I've had the opportunity to do it, is certainly in school and when I've been connected with certain religious groups and choirs. I've sung in trios and sextets and small choruses. I've sung with Eugene Normandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra at one point. That was in college. So music is a really important part of my life. And it's such a wonderful metaphor for the real world, because you have to hold your own part. You have to know your own part. You have to know the timing. You have to know the notes. You have to sing it right. You have to modulate your voice as well as you can. But at the same time, you have to listen to everyone else in the choir. I thought everybody had this kind of a life. Did my parents plan it or intend it? I don't know. I really don't know. I think they were living out their own lives. I was born before the Second World War. My father was drafted into the Navy at age 38 toward the end of the war. And my mother had to go back to work at that point as a school teacher. So they pretty much did what needed to be done at the time. I lived in Pensacola, Florida when I was 9 years old for 5 or 6 months, went to school down there. And of course grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs pretty much. I can remember taking the Navy bus to the office where my father was working. He was a chaplain's assistant because of his musical background. And I'd go sit in the office and I'd eat the salt pills that they had in there and just fool around at writing or typing or doing whatever I wanted to do while he was doing what he wanted to do. My parents never had any discipline problems with me. It was just they modeled what could be done, what a functional family can look like. And I just fell into it. You know, I watched them. I learned from them. I certainly learned from them verbally. I learned in terms of the game, all the games that we were playing all the time. I compare what's going on now with kids. Everybody has their face in a smartphone all the time. So everybody's connecting through this artificial intelligence rather than connecting directly. When I was a kid, after supper, we would be out in the neighborhood with all the other neighborhood kids. But we felt very, very free and very respected. The reason we moved to Pensacola was because my father got assigned to Pensacola when he was in the Navy during the Second World War. We lived in a little, as I recall, very minimal 3-bedroom house. I can remember my mother with a washboard over the bathroom tub washing our clothes. There were pigs wandering around outside. There was a fence, and I spent hours up on top of that fence walking around it learning to balance, for example. I just had the freedom to do it. I am my parents' only natural child, and I was the firstborn. My mother wanted to have 4 children. I was the first, and about 2 years later she got pregnant again. My mother's uterus was separate. It was divided into 2 parts with a membrane. I had been conceived in the larger side of her uterus, and I was born a month early, but still I had the space to grow for 8 months. My sibling was conceived in the smaller part on the smaller side of the membrane. And what the doctor told my father while my mother was under anesthesia was that this pregnancy needs to be terminated, because if it is not terminated, the child will die and your wife will die. So he gave permission. My mother didn't even have a say in it. When she woke up, her uterus was gone and she couldn't have more children. My parents adopted a little boy when I was 5 years old. And that was an interesting dynamic there, because they knew who his mother was. The father was probably a soldier or sailor that she'd had an affair with. She was Catholic, as I recall, so she was going to have this child, but then she needed to give it up for adoption. So my parents adopted my brother, I think when he was maybe 5 months old, something like that. My adopted brother is now deceased. He went through a very painful death of bone cancer a number of years ago, shortly after my mother died. The way life happens is really, really strange. When he died, his youngest daughter, I think it was, had a memorial service at her, she had a gathering, a family gathering at her home. And at that point, I met my adopted brother's stepsister, because his son had gone out searching for the genetic bloodline. And he found this stepsister. So I met her. I think I was accepting, as far as I can remember, and I really don't remember. I do remember that occasionally he and I would get into, there were probably verbal battles. I don't know whether we were fighting over toys or something, but we'd get into a fight. And my mother's way of handling it was really interesting. And I respect her for this. She sent us both to our own rooms. She didn't try to figure out who was right or who was wrong or what was going on. She just sent us to our own rooms. It was kind of like solitary confinement. And our instructions were, when you're ready to get along with one another, you can come on out. So she was leaving it up to us, whether or not we would stay in the room and, sulk and get mad and whatever, or whether we'd come back out and be nice to one another. I had to really think about, well, who am I? And I wanted my name to represent who I am. Who I am as an individual, not my relationships with other people. And as I thought about it, I thought, what happened to all my maternal ancestors? Why are they not recognized in my name? Men don't have to go through this kind of stuff. But women do, and it's a cultural conditioning. My surname, my father's name was Smith. My mother's name was Warfield. Her maiden name was Warfield. I put the two together, and then it was, okay, which do I put in the middle, which do I put last? And I don't know why, I don't think I cared a lot about that, but I had to make a choice. And it's interesting that I actually put the Warfield last, because I've had a lot of people tease me. How can you be talking about peace when your name is Warfield? But there is a tension there, and there's also a resolution. That at age 20, I would never even have thought of going to law school. At age 40, it was a way I could get my self-respect back. It was a way I could use my abilities and talents to the fullest. My husband had always said to me we had the perfect marriage. And I was a darned good wife. I mean, by traditional standards, I took care of the house, I was a good mother, I cut the grass, I grew organic vegetables, I played with the kids, took them places. We did things together as a family. And I don't know, I'd never been asked out much in high school, for example. I didn't date a lot. So, and it was always, what am I doing wrong? Those were the questions I was asking myself. What's wrong with me? Here I've got all these credentials, all these accomplishments, and somehow no male wants to have anything to do with me. So, the sexual dynamic, I think there was a part of me that wanted to fix that between me and the man to whom I had made vows and the father of my children. So there was a part of me that was willing to allow him to go out and have an affair, if it would help resolve our own sexual relationship. Maybe he would learn something. And also, maybe I could learn something from a relationship with another man as well. We were actually in a group marriage for 10 years. Really bizarre. The whole thing fell apart. It didn't work for me and the other man. The other man and I had an unbelievably creative, co-creative, unifying sexual relationship. When we lived together, he suddenly became abusive. He would scream at me. He would throw glasses into the wall. He would abuse my children. So I felt betrayed by all three of them. Oh, and he also decided, as soon as I moved in with him, he decided he didn't want the group marriage anymore. Then the kids were playing into this dynamic too, because I had 3 sons. He had 1 son, and his son was the youngest of the 6 children. If his son would get into a disagreement with either any of my sons, he'd be right there smashing my sons down so his son could be on top, even though he was the youngest one. I wasn't going to stand that. I'm sorry. The dynamic of the group marriage made every single one of us come face to face with our own, it's called shadow, I think, in Jungian terms, the dark side of our character, our personality. We had to face it and look at it and deal with it. One person or 2 people or 3 people would be on this amazing emotional high, and then the 4th would be down in the dark night of the soul simultaneously. And so it was like being on an emotional roller coaster all the time and trying to figure out how to deal with it. And then there were these tensions with the children too, which surprised me. I mean, there were a lot of things that came up that surprised me. I mean, one being, I never thought of myself as being a jealous person, but jealousy did come up for me when I saw how close my legal husband was becoming with the other woman. I'm probably the one who got most deeply hurt through, by the end result, because I felt as if I wasn't allowed to give everything that I had to give, or be everything that I could be. Because I am now single, I'm widowed, so I go to a family event alone, and the father of my children is there with a woman who broke up our marriage. I was a single woman with 3 children who had been out of the job market for a lot of years, had to go back into the job market at $1.50 an hour, even though I had a degree from an exceptionally good college. Liberal arts degree was worthless in Vineland, New Jersey in the 70s, and that's when I decided to go to law school. I had all these credentials, I had all this activities I'd been involved in, I'd been a top-notch student and in a lot of extracurricular activities, and all of a sudden I was down in hell, all by myself except for my parents' support, earning almost nothing. I was making coffee, I was filing, and I was reviewing pension plans that had been prepared by another lawyer in Vineland, New Jersey. And the guy couldn't write a simple sentence with a subject and a predicate. I'm correcting this guy's grammar. He's got a law degree. I knew my boss was probably paying me, say, $35 for the amount of work I was doing on this. And I was barely surviving. As I say, I had to count my pennies before I could go out and buy a quart of milk. I was dealing with a son who'd gotten, dragged into the drugs. And he'd been a straight A student. He became a straight F student and dropped out of school. And he went on to getting a commission to go to the Naval Academy, and he was a 2-time submarine commander. So his life has been very successful. How much of that was related to the group marriage? I don't know. And my youngest son, he went through high school and college too, and he's in a management position up in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. It was my middle son who went through hell. He went through the same hell that his mother did, but in different ways. It was not an easy time. A lot of people listen to my story and they tell me, they say, I can't believe how courageous you were. I wasn't courageous. I was angry and I was surviving. Yeah, I am who I am because I have been placed in very stressful situations that I have had to overcome, is a really good word. If you look at the Christian Bible, the book of Revelation, you will find that word overcome over and over and over and over again. To he who overcometh shall I give. This is all about consciousness shifts. This isn't about stuff that's going to happen after your body dies. Being a piece of coal turned into a diamond through huge pressure. And all words work for specific contexts or specific intents. But if you don't start thinking about what you intend to create with your words, they're just going to come flying out of your mouth, and a lot of it's going to be conditioned thought, whatever you've been conditioned into. I had always done a lot of writing. So writing was and journaling was part of my entire lifestyle. And I've told this story many times. It's included in the first chapter of my book. It's online on my website. My book being Change Your Words, Change Your World. And my oldest son began wetting the bed again after his youngest brother was born. And this was really frustrating for me because I was a busy mother with 3 preschoolers, and it didn't need to be, of course, being a perfect mother, but I didn't need to be changing wet sheets every day and washing my pajamas and then putting everything back together again. I had more than enough to do. First I ignored the bedwetting, hoping it would go away on its own. It didn't. I sat down and decided it was time to have a talk with Bill and explain to him why a 5-year-old is too old to wet the bed. That didn't do any good. I was wasting my time and his. And he sat there and listened very attentively, but it didn't stop the bedwetting. I raised my voice, but that sure didn't work. The bed was still wet. I spanked him once. That didn't work, and then I was getting out of control. My mother gave me a book called Summerhill by an English schoolmaster, A.S. Neal, who had a very strange way of dealing with these quote problem kids in his class, the ones that were disruptive and threw spitballs and punched the other students and stuff like that. He didn't make them stand in a corner until they could come back and be good. He didn't make them write 100 times, "I will be good." He gave them a penny. I think he did watch. He gave them a penny. Okay, that makes no sense to me, but I'm at my wit's end and I was getting out of control. I have no idea what I'm doing. I simply have a model in front of me to use. Went to my wallet, pulled out a penny, gave it to Bill, and walked away. He kind of looked up at me as if I wonder what's wrong with her this morning. But he never wet the bed again. And I was astounded. The moment that was really transforming for me was a time when a man came to my door. It was around the same time that I had the bedwetting problem with Bill. A man came to my door. He was angry. I was new about that. I'd had a lot of angry men in my life. He was angry. He was angry with me. And he wasn't, I think he was a neighbor, but not a close neighbor. I don't remember what I did to upset him. I don't remember who he was or what he wore or what his name was or anything. All I remember was the anger. And it was directed at me. And in the past, I might have gotten defensive. I might have said, "Oh, you shouldn't be angry over a little thing like that." I didn't do any of that. I didn't give him a penny either. But I just said, "I am so sorry. What can I do to make this right?" And like that, the anger disappeared. We started having a rational conversation. And when he left, we were friends. But the thought that came into my head was words I had learned as a child in Sunday school. Resist not evil, but turn the other cheek. And I had never understood those words. As a child, they made about as much sense to me as giving a kid a penny for bad behavior, which was the way it was conceptually structured in our society. Again, this is all cultural conditioning that we human beings have made up. We can change this. My intention, I don't know that I even had an intention at that point other than being open to playing with these new ways of being for me. I wasn't applying my energy to the outside world or to other people. So I wasn't in this kind of dynamic. I was so excited about this consciousness shift that I personally had had that I felt driven to go out and tell other people about it, talk about it. I wanted to change the whole world. So my life path from that point on has really been around an initial question, which was frustration over not being able to communicate this experience to other people, and start looking at what words work and what words don't work. What words are actually counterproductive. If the intention, I'm getting back to this idea of intention, if the intention is to shift a human dynamic from either this power over, which is a patriarchal structure, power over, this kind of the guy at the top and it goes down the chain, or power against. If the intention is to shift into a power with dynamic, or a teamwork dynamic, or a mutually supportive dynamic, how can I use words to do this? When I started looking at words and what they do, words separate They divide and they categorize. That's what they do. You stop to think about words. You've got high, low, good, bad, right, wrong, black, white, red, yellow, and we're conditioned into this conceptual division and separation and categorization through our language. From the time we're born, our parents teach us, this is mommy, that's daddy, that's a tree, this is the dog. We're taught that, and it becomes very normal for us, and it's actually very useful, but we need to be paying attention to what we're doing and the fact that we human beings have created this language that we then condition one another into. Now, if you tie this into some of the religious stories or teachings, there is right at the beginning of Genesis, the book of Genesis in the Bible, the Judaic and Christian Bible, the story of Adam and Eve living in the Garden of Eden until they ate of the tree of knowledge, which of course that was the one tree they were told they should not eat from, because as soon as they ate of that tree of knowledge, and this is all metaphor, this is not literal truth. We tend to think in terms of literal truth too. This is metaphor. As soon as they ate of that tree of knowledge, they suddenly became aware that they were naked, and they were suddenly ashamed. Alfred Korzybski, who was a Polish semanticist, is famous for the saying, the map is not the territory. And I like to expand on that a little bit. The map is not the territory. The words are not the experience. The menu is not the food you put in your mouth. So our words are nothing but maps of our experience. Journaling is a great technique for traveling through challenges out to solutions on the other side. Writing down whatever thoughts come into your head from whatever source, in whatever order they come in, without censorship. You know, I would never say to another person, I am an enlightened being. But I know people tend to see me that way. I know what we do with words. I understand words. I have a lot of skill with words and the importance of intention behind words. You know, what is it? If you could create any kind of world you wanted to create in which to live, what would it look like? I think most people would agree it would be safe. Safe from violence. There'd probably be enough food and water for everyone. And this goes through Maslow's hierarchy of needs, hierarchy of human needs. So accountability is vital. And accountability creates trust in human relationships, which is why it's vital. Now, I can only work on my own accountability. And I'm very aware of that. I try to do it all the time. I don't always succeed because I'm not perfect, and I know that. And you talk about being an enlightened being, but that's part of enlightenment, is recognizing that you can strive for excellence. When you're having a conversation with another person, that's where you need to really be conscious of the words you're choosing. And how do you want this relationship to end up? Do you want to be friends, or do you want to be enemies? Do you want to be shooting off nuclear bombs and going around and killing people, killing one another on battlefields? Or do you want to live in a peaceful, powerful, prosperous, dynamic, co-creative, aware community of human beings? But I can tell you, it's very important to me at this point in my life. I have no idea how many physical years I have left or how long I'll be mentally competent, but it's very important for me to get out into the world from my perspective, my single individual life and spiritual path. It's important for me to find many, many, many different ways of getting that information, just view it as information, of one person's life out into the world. People have said to me I'm a model for younger women, for example. And in fact, Andrew Harvey said that to me. My life has been a process. It's become an open book in many respects. And I hope that whatever I have done here on this planet, there's a sense in which it's evergreen. And I would hope that it would serve other people long after my body is dead. You know, it's certainly, I'm going to call it connection, and it is experiential or energetic. You can't solidify it at all. It's a connection with a power greater than myself. Allowing that power to flow through me and use me as appropriate, and I don't know where it's going. I have to simply trust that it is going where it needs to go, and what will happen will happen.